A crazy day already. Trust me, I've been to many places today. Apologies. It's a pleasure to be here, and I was delighted to listen to the previous panel. And I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on scaling social innovation in Africa. So I think the panel I listened to was very much focused on the role of the government and the role of the citizen. I'm speaking to social innovators. How many social innovators do we have in the room, or people who consider themselves social innovators? Some people are hesitant. They're not sure if they are social innovators or not. So basically, who is a social innovator? A social innovator is an individual. They can be in the public, private, or nonprofit sector who are committed to solving a social problem. And that social problem is something that affects the masses of people in society. And why are they social innovators? Because they've come to address that social problem with a new way of thinking, a new approach, a new methodology, something that might have been tried elsewhere that's being tried here. So that's basically the working definition. And what is scale? And why is scale important? Now, scale means many things to different people. Some people would define scale as reaching the largest number of people possible. I have a presentation, but I'm just going to go ahead. Yeah? Can we? Okay, it's going to come up. For me, scale might mean, for you, scale might mean, in the tech world, the number of eyeballs that look at your website, right? But in the social impact space, it's not just about eyeballs. It's about transformation. So by looking at your website, what has happened in their lives? How have they changed who they are? So define what social innovation is, and it can be a piece of legislation, a social movement, an intervention, a new technology, a new idea, a new principle. Now, depending on what you have, scaling is different. So you can scale an idea, you can scale an innovation by replicating it, by having others adopt it, by reaching more people by setting up branches all over the place. You look at companies like Google and you say Google has scaled, right? Why has Google scaled? Nobody knows. Not only do they have a physical presence everywhere, but people rely on them to get their message across. So now when you want to check for information, the first place you go to is Google. I'm using that as an example. Now, there's a continuum of social engagement in the nonprofit, private, public sectors, and then there's the intersection where social innovators walk across three sectors. Scale is so critical in Africa and in Nigeria in particular. And I decided to research this topic because I've started a bunch of organizations and they have not scaled. You might say, Leap Africa, well, you've worked in 26 states, you've reached 40,000 people. In a country of 170 million, is that impact? I don't think so. It's not good enough for me. And I've helped start about 10 organizations in West Africa, and they have not scaled. And I look at the problems, and I'm overwhelmed by the problems. So I wanted to understand, why aren't we scaling? Other people share my view. Judith Rodin is the president of Rockefeller, and this quote she has says, solutions to many of the world's most difficult social problems don't need to be invented. They only need to be found, funded, and scaled. And when you think about our context and the population growth that's expected in our region, in Nigeria in particular, when I heard these statistics, I was floored. That by 2050, we're going to have 50 million people in Lagos. Now, Lagos was built with infrastructure for 3 million. So with 50 million, where are they going to go to school? What are they going to eat? Where are they going to sleep? What's going to happen to the waste generated? I live in this city. This is my problem. It's your problem too. I know some of the well-off people are building a little island somewhere. I don't know if you've seen it. They might lock the rest of us out because we can't afford it. Has anybody been to Eco Atlantic? That's really the vision, right? The rest of us will be on top of each other. So this is actually alarming. I don't know if you're alarmed. I'm alarmed. We have social problems that are going to be exponential if we don't address them. And yet, there are people like me and you who every day are hitting our heads against the wall trying to solve these problems, but our initiatives are small. Our organizations are small relative to the magnitude of the problem, so scaling is important. So I spent the last year trying to understand what are the prerequisites for scale. And therefore, and I'm going to go through what you can do differently and what I can do differently if we want to really address these social problems. The first I have noticed by talking to many innovators across Africa, as well as financiers, impact investors, is the issue around leadership and human capacity. There's always a great founder with a great amount of passion, but you don't find the next tier of leadership. That founder cannot solve all the problems themselves, and as the needs grow, that founder is overwhelmed. And you notice that as organizations grow, the quality of the service they're providing or the impact they're having drops. Have you noticed that? I have told even the MDs of big companies here that growth is good though, but I don't recognize your service. And that is what we see repeatedly. The second and even more important is our business models. Many of them are not demand-driven, they're not low-cost, and they're not scalable. Our ability to navigate what we call an ecosystem. And finally, the ability to secure patient financing. I'm going to talk about what I'm learning others are doing to address them. The first one, in terms of talent for scaling, which is critical, right, is that many organizations that have been able to scale on the African continent have basically invested in creating a culture that attracts mission-driven high achievers. When I look at CC Hub, I think they're doing something right, because they're attracting mission-driven high achievers. I need to come and spend some time with them to see how they're doing it. Now, it's about the corporate culture. It's about your brand and your reputation, the roles and responsibilities you give your team members, how you engage with the community around you, whether you have a creative program like a management trainee program, how you use volunteers and fellows. And some people have done phenomenal job in finding people. They have like 700 people volunteering for them and thousands of people waiting in line to work for them. We all need to create that type of organization where people say, I want to work for you for free. People used to say that to me before, but I don't get that anymore. Very few. I used to get calls all over the world, Ndidi, my dream is to work for you. Now they want, how much can you pay? I don't know if you guys have that, but CC Hub is still getting that, so I'm going to figure out what they're doing right. The second thing is around training talent. In-house training, but using technology, and that's why you're so important. Technology allows you to train people really, really quickly to achieve what you need to achieve, and allows you to standardize operations. Some of the entrepreneurs I've talked to basically have transforming healthcare systems in many African countries without needing doctors in each of the healthcare centers, because they have a hub with a doctor, and what are they doing? E-medicine, telemedicine, and the doctor sits in some central location and they just send pictures if they can't figure it out, and they have low-level community representatives working in the health centers. Retaining talent, equity stakes, rotations, governance. How many of us have strong governance structures? How many of us have strong boards? Leap Africa has been teaching about this for 13 years. And yet, I meet so many social innovators who just want themselves, their family members, and maybe a few friends to be involved in the governance of the organization. You will never scale if you keep that model. And finally, succession. How many of us have a second tier and a third tier? And how many of us recognize when our skills are no longer useful? And when we need to step aside for someone else to take the organization to the next level? This has remained a big barrier for scaling. Now, what about business models that scale? Many of you might have heard of the play pump. How many of you have heard about the play pump? Now, the play pump, about 15 years ago, I went to the World Economic Forum, and it was being celebrated and touted as the solution to the water challenges in rural Africa. Really celebrated. The idea was that children would play in a merry-go-round. Do you see that merry-go-round there? They'd play, and their action of playing would allow water to come up, and it would go onto a reservoir, which could be branded by an FMCG like Coca-Cola, and then the whole village would have water. Great idea, right? Funders were excited. The KC Foundation was pushing this forward, and they could not scale. Why? The business model was flawed. First of all, it cost $10,000 for each of these play pumps. That was really expensive. When anything broke in the play pump, it was very difficult to replicate. But even worse, children had to play for 27 hours to be able to generate the water required. Now, when you ask children to play for 27 hours, is it play or child labor? Child labor. So we laugh at this thing, right? But how many of us have play pumps in our business model? Our business models might be play pumps. I came back after learning about my work, and I said to the LEAP staff, let's cost out how much we actually spend on each of the fellows or each of the beneficiaries we train. Not just for the training session, but between when they enter the LEAP world and when they leave. Let's say for our employability program, our work to school program, how many of them have actually gotten jobs? We're not going to count just the 2 hours or the 10 weeks we spend with them, but that impact we're trying to achieve. How much does it cost us? And if it costs us $10,000, we've become what? A play pump. Even if it costs us 100,000 naira, we're a play pump, because that limits how many people we can reach. If it costs me $100,000 naira to make impact in each life, and I want to reach 100 million people, how much money will I need? Do you understand the point I'm trying to make? So we have to look at our models and really question the problems we're trying to address, whether this service offering is valid, who else can do it better than us, whether we've tested it long enough to prove that it actually works. And I'm not talking about eyeballs. People in your field, all they care about is eyeballs, right? Or how many customers have been my first-time customers. You know, you hear these statistics and you're like, so what? How has it changed their life? That's what social impact is about. Social change is about transforming the lives of people, solving problems. And unless you've solved a problem, please don't count it as success. Is it demand-driven? And can you scale it appropriately in the ecosystem in which you are in? To scale, do you need to work with government? Are they the partner? Do you need to work with private sector? And what are the partnerships required? Now, thinking about that, the first thing is, what is the ideal structure for your business? And I'm meeting social innovators who are telling me, we have a hybrid. We have a for-profit, we have a non-profit, or we have an S-corp. Do you understand? And I even have subsidiaries. Some of them are non-profits, some of them are for-profits. Why is that useful? Because the for-profits are profit centers, meaning they should be generating money. The non-profits, they should be subsidized to a point. Do you get the point? But many of us have for-profits operating as non-profits, non-profits operating as for-profits, and we can't really do the work required to get what we want done. I've talked about demand-driven, but I want to mention the issue of data-driven. We actually have to embed M&E into the work we do from day one. That's how we can measure impact. Low cost, I think I've beaten that point to death, but using appropriate technology helps us reduce the cost. And then we have to have clear systems and structures which allow us to replicate. There has to be zero room for error. So if someone else you're not there and someone else wants to replicate it, they can do it very easily. Now, partnerships are the third thing, partnerships for scaling. And in Nigeria, we don't partner enough. We just don't. We don't work with each other. CC Hub is different. You guys partner. But in many of our other, in the worlds I live in, people think it's unusual that I call up all the people in agriculture who are doing the same things I'm doing and I want to spend time with them, or in leadership. Because we can do more if we're working together. But across sectors, it's even worse. We often compete with governments. Government competes with us. We compete with private sector. They compete with us. Even some of the foundations that are supposed to be partnering are competing. So we have to think about how you're going to collaborate. Direct, indirect, some people avoid government, some people find them as a champion. Financing scale. You guys are going to have a panel on scale, so financing, so I'm not going to beat this up. But what I've learned is that there are so many opportunities for financing, and that in Nigeria, we're not even tapping 1/3 of them. A lot of us focus on earned income and donations. But we haven't really tapped the crowdfunding. I don't know how many of you have successfully used crowdfunding here to raise money. So, but if this was a session in America, do you know that 90% of the people would have raised their hand? So why? Why aren't we using crowdfunding? One of my mentees, I'll call her a mentee, Mira, how many of you have heard of Tomato Jaws? She raised through crowdfunding for a farm in Nasarawa. She's not Nigerian. She raised money from people to start a tomato farm in Nasarawa. You guys should watch the video, Tomato Jaws. She challenged me if she could do it for Nasarawa tomato. Then is that sexy relative to your industry? You guys are doing cool stuff. Tomato in Nasarawa is not so exciting to many people. And she raised money. About her first round was what, $50,000, $60,000, which opened her up to a whole range of impact investors who are now giving her substantial amounts of money. The same with challenge funds. Social impact bonds is even a very, very new thing that they're piloting in Mozambique, which is basically, if we're able to achieve this change that we want to see in society, you guys will pay us a premium. It's amazing. And then what are the different approaches to scaling that I've seen? This is primarily for the education sector, because I spoke and did this exact presentation yesterday. But there are people who embed scaling into their DNA from the onset. And if you were not like me and you didn't embed it into your DNA, like Leap, you can actually do it. It's never too late, right, to transform your model. And that's what we're going through at the moment, because charity begins at home. Now, there's an example, Bridge Academies International. How many of you have heard of them? So Bridge Academies will tell you that they'll break even when they have 500,000 students in their school. They have schools, they start a new skill every 2.5 days. And they're based in Kenya. So they already know when they're going to break even. And I think they're about 150,000, 200,000 now. And they're starting in Nigeria. They were in Kenya, now they're starting in Nigeria. And what was interesting about them is that they're for-profit, but they also have a non-profit. But they're telling you when they're going to break even. And they're able to raise significant amounts of money from different donors because they already have their end in sight. They're about 7 years old. In Canva Youth, South Africa, is reaching countless number of youth. What do? They do after-school training. So they use volunteers like me and you and select children, maybe students from SS2, and spend intensive 2-year after school with them, enabling them to get into university. And they have thousands of volunteers all over the country. Now, replication, Teach for All. Now, what Teach for All does, instead of expanding organically, what they do is in each country where they go in, they basically say, we're going to find champions who are going to start Teach for All. We're not going to give them any money. We're just going to give them our model to replicate. Do you understand that? So they are scaling by finding champions in each location. Then the franchise model. This is a very interesting model, micro-franchising. Have you guys heard of that term before? So there's this organization called Kidogo, one of the organizations I profiled, and they're working with early childhood education. They basically go into slum communities and they find mamas, and they say, Mama, I'm going to teach you how to have a daycare center, and you'll be a franchise of Kidogo. And Kidogo is so unique because you can actually pay per day. So if you drop off your child, maybe you pay 100 naira, which allows low-income people to be able to afford daycare. So the day I get a job to go and braid somebody's hair, I can drop off my 2 children for 200 naira. Wouldn't that transform Nigeria if we had this type of models? Because it means that many women would be able to actually leave their home and spend a day getting some income, and through that, hopefully, improve themselves. Shaping policy is another way to scale. How many of you know Action Health Incorporated? Now, they're one of the really strong nonprofits that have stood the test of time. But what they did was they started with going into schools and starting these sexuality clubs, teaching young people about HIV/AIDS. But that wasn't enough. They said to scale, we need to shape policy. We need to get the Nigerian government to incorporate this into our curriculum. And so over 10 years, they fought to get it into curriculum. And now it's part of our curriculum. So that's a way of changing ecosystems. And then Leap Africa is also trying to do that. We started our YDTPs, Youth Leadership and Ethics Training Programs. We used to train young people one-on-one. And then we started training trainers. So we train teachers in public schools, we train community leaders to deliver our curriculum. So that instead of reaching hundreds, we can reach thousands. And through those, we can reach millions. And that's the way we're trying to scale. Now, there are many challenges to scaling, and nobody says it's easy. But I think in Nigeria, we need examples of organizations that can reach millions of people and make an impact in their lives. And that's why this is such an important topic to me, because I feel that all of us will be beating our heads against the wall if all our hard work doesn't transform my environment. And unlike the previous panel, I'm not waiting for the government to do it. I think we have to do it. And if we get big enough and strong enough, guess what? The government will want to partner with us. They will actually say, can I work with you? You're doing good work. Can I support you? And that's what we need. In other parts of the world, the government would be the biggest funder for many of our initiatives. But in our country, we actually, Leap Africa has to pay teachers to come for the training. We have to. They won't come. We have to. The government hasn't given us 1 naira since we started training their teachers to deliver leadership ethics and civics curriculum to improve their communities. But we're not waiting. We keep on pushing because we want to transform our country. So there are still challenges, but there are still examples, even in the public sector, of social innovation. And in the health landscape, most of the innovations are in the public sector, not even in the private sector. So I'm just going to end with some of the questions that I'm wrestling with that I'd love your help in answering. Because I'm not done with my research, but hopefully this book will be very useful to all of you once it's published. The first is, what innovative approaches are being utilized by entrepreneurs in this room to address the issue of scaling? What are you doing to address the issue of scaling? Are you thinking about it? And if you are, how are you preparing yourself to scale your initiative, to scale your organization? What specific steps can we take to address this issue of financing scale in our context? The third one is, what can we learn from Kenya? Now, many of you know that Kenya is now, everybody refers me to people in Kenya. And I'm wondering, what are they doing in Kenya? Some people have told me it's M-Pesa. M-Pesa opened the door. Now everybody comes to Kenya to test their social innovations. I want to figure out what we can do to learn from Kenya, to create that same bubble of social innovation in this country. And then the last piece is the one that keeps me up at night. Because every time I get referred to a social innovator, I happen to find out that most of them who are scaling in Africa don't look like me or you. They're Europeans, Americans, who are doing really great work, but they're doing it in Africa. And they're scaling, and they're getting money, and they're getting support, and they're putting in place the governance structures, and they're doing a lot of the right things. Why? It's a provocative question. What can we do to ensure that we have more homegrown social innovations in our continent? Many of the impact investors want to fund Nigerian social innovators, right? Where can they find them? Where are they? What can we do to create more homegrown social innovators? So those are my questions that I'm leaving you with, and I'd love answers. My email address is here, I think, yes. So please note it down and reach out to me if you have more insights into the work I'm trying to do. Thank you very much. Any questions? Can I take a few? So this is
basically, I think this also gives me an opportunity to make a reference to the last panel. I think, I don't know how many of us have seen the video Niger Junction. Some of the things we discussed here today in terms of shaping a future for Nigeria is in that video. Most of the time, we don't make reference to work of other people and the rest of them. Now, basically what I want to say is in your first question that many of us in Nigeria, we don't leverage institutions for our social innovation. Majority of our interventions are policy issues. Many people, they want to do stuff, but they have not even checked out whether they are policy. So what do we need to do, really, to get people to come to terms with the fact that you're not that fantastic with your idea? It's a policy. Somebody has, I mean, you know that thing of, oh, it's my own, it's my idea. What do we need to do to break away from this thing? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I'll just take all the questions together, yeah? And Niger Junction he was referring to, thank you for the plug. So about 5 years ago, Leap Africa actually put together scenarios for Nigeria. Nigeria 2025, looking at the 4 possible scenarios for Nigeria and what we as citizens could do. It's a video. You guys should watch it. It's actually still online. And we have CDs, and the executive director just walked in, so you can ask her for a CD. And it looked at 4 scenarios. Jaga Jaga was one of them. Jaga Jaga was Nigeria becoming like Somalia. Huh? And people were like, Tufia, kwa, God forbid. Right? We never knew that Boko Haram would start when we did it. It was before Boko Haram, so it must be like 7 years ago. The second one was Shine Your Eye. It was Nigeria becoming like a China. Right? Great economic development, but very limited human freedoms. Then perambulator, walking around in circles, repeating the same mistakes from generation to generation. And then the fourth one, which everybody loves, was we don't win. We didn't know God win would become a song, but that one was we don't win. So thank you for the plug. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, madam. My name is Olufemi Omotayo. I'm one of the social innovators for the year in the fellowship. I'm just answering the last question.
Yes.
And my thinking is that there are many homegrown innovators, but they don't have the kind of support to actually get that skill. So I think there's a kind of difference in our environment compared to other places. So you have an idea in some other places, you just push it out, you get a lot of support, so I've had and all that. So, but it's not like that here. You have this idea, you want to do so many things, but you have to battle against so many odds. So that's my thinking about that.
Okay, one last question. Any woman want to ask a question? Oh, okay, yes, good. Yeah.
In terms of, finding ways in which, you can get your idea out into the open. And I'll cite a personal example. There are a number of fantastic programs here. I happen to be a beneficiary of You Win, most recently TIP, and then that's on the national level. And then there are also a number of business plan competitions. I can't remember if it was your presentation or somebody else's presentation that had it. Participating in also, if you happen to be successful in it, certainly puts you out there into the limelight and in many ways does validate what you're doing. And then when, you talk about people wanting to invest in what you're doing, once they see that level of validation, they're more willing to commit funds to your social innovation or whatever it is that you're doing on the social sphere.
Okay, all right. All right, we'll take yours since you didn't get to ask a question, then we're done. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Kende. I work for Student, a platform that connects interns with employers. So I want to touch more on the issues of partnership. I want to understand how we can actually work in our own sense of sector where we connect interns with employers. Because I think it could be a good one because we've been told lately that partnership could trigger a lot, but have little idea about that.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks for your question. So the first one about ideas. I think the challenge, as you've said, is that many of us are very worried about people stealing our ideas. And so we don't believe in sharing them widely. Now, I heard when I was starting up, when I was about the age of some of you in the room, that there's no new idea under the sun. And I still believe it today. And an idea is a dime a dozen, but what is different is execution. Execution, 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 and execution with excellence, which we lack in our environment. So I have never been afraid of sharing my idea with people. Do you understand? In fact, when I decided to write this book, I probably sent the idea to like 200 people. And I said, what do you think? Are there books already written about this? Because if there's a book, I don't need to do it. Let me just read the book. Do you understand? So it's important that we change our mindset because we become our biggest hindrance. Do you understand? We put obstacles in our own path. And it requires a big amount of vulnerability and humility, right? Because you know that you're not right, you're always learning, and you're open. And so I think you're onto something, and the message to everybody here is there's no new idea. You know, I was here 2 years ago. When did we have the business plan competition? And every single, of the 20 finalists, maybe 5 of them were e-platforms for exam support. And each of them said they have a relationship with JAMB. 2 weeks later, I went to another business plan competition. Half of them, the same thing. I'm like, and I met an impact investor earlier in the week. I think he came to see you guys. And I told him, he said, he was telling me about somebody. And I said, everybody has a relationship with JAMB. So as far as I'm concerned, of those 20 organizations doing exam support or prep support for young people, what is the difference? It's going to be execution and staying power. Because guess what? Many of us will give up. You know how many times I've wanted to give up with every entity I've started? Many times. Thank God. Even yesterday I went to a conference and someone was talking about some of the books we've written and how they transformed their lives. I said, I have to tell the LEAP staff, because sometimes I think we're not making a difference. They think they're not making a difference. So to have people talk about it, not even knowing who I was, is just a testimony to the work. but we often want to give up. So that's it. And then in terms of partnerships, yeah, you can't live without partnerships, especially in your sector. You have to actively look for partnerships, whether they're organizations of employers like NECA. How do you make yourself visible in that entity? With that entity, there are industry associations that should know about you. Then even all the corporate bodies are looking to find ways to find talent. Start with the private universities, they're easier. Sorry to say. Sure, and I'm happy to give you all the connections I have. I don't have a problem sharing, so start with the private universities. And I think the last thing was about funding and how difficult it is here relative to other places. I think Nigeria is difficult primarily because we don't have a local support base yet. And I think Mr. King talked about the need to get local, because now I go abroad and I tell them, can you fund Nigerian entrepreneurs and innovators? They say, what about Dangote? I get that everywhere. What about Dangote? Why isn't he funding you? And I tell them, well, we are starting to create a local philanthropic base, but it doesn't exist yet. But we have angel investors in Nigeria. There are people who are HNIs who are not Dangote who will fund an idea. But they want to see that you're credible. They want to see you have financial track record, that you have a board, that you're not a one-man business. That I'm not going to give you money and you buy a car. Do you know how many people I have supported who the first thing they've done is go and buy a car? And then they look at my phone and say, you have this small phone. You can do better. So the mindset has to change. So I think if you show that you have a track record and you are credible and you have a team of people behind you, you will get support. So I'm happy to give you my card and see how we can support you. Thank you very much and all the best.